Good morning and welcome. My name is Tim Kruger. I am a trustee at Carbon Gap. Carbon Gap, as you will have seen from the posters as you passed on the way down here.
Do I need to do anything, or you will?
Advocates for the scale-up of carbon removal to ensure that Europe meets its climate goals. Carbon Gap is a science-led organization, a charity funded exclusively from philanthropic sources. The EU is making great strides in cutting emissions, but it is not enough. In order to meet the obligations of the EU climate law, it will be necessary to also rapidly scale up the development and deployment of techniques to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Europe needs a plan. Currently, the EU has over 20 different policy files relating to carbon dioxide removal, CDR. Some are very specific to CDR, such as the Carbon Removal Certification Framework, while others, such as the Net Zero Industry Act, touch on CDR to a much lesser degree. It is a warren of policies, and while Carbon Gap's policy tracker can help you navigate that warren, there is a need for a holistic and coordinated plan to accelerate the scale-up of carbon removal. Our aim today is to start a conversation on the creation of that plan, an EU CDR strategy. I'm going to talk very briefly about three things: scalability, durability, and acceptability. Scalability. We need to support the development of a range of proposed CDR techniques, and we need to provide the regulatory structures to motivate deployment at a climatically relevant scale. Durability. We need to ensure that techniques not only remove CO2 from the air, but also store it away from the air for an extended period of time. And acceptability. Technologies do not exist separate from society. There is a need for extensive engagement with stakeholders and publics. Proposed techniques will only work if they are aligned with other societal goals and values. The structure of the event is as follows. The keynote talk will be delivered by Alexandre Paquot, Director at DG Clima, and will be followed by the launch of our vision for an EU CDR strategy by my colleagues at Carbon Gap. We will focus on 4 pillars of the strategy. This will be done through panel discussions in 2 sets of 2 parallel sessions. In each session, one panel discussion will take place on this level, and the other one will take place on the floor above. Details are behind me. We will round things off with a plenary session back here to discuss the outcomes of the panels, and that will be followed by lunch. Please feel free to not only eat the delicious food that will be here, but also network with each other and the Carbon Gap team, who will be very happy to answer your questions. I would now like to invite you to join me in welcoming our keynote speaker, Alexandre Paquot, to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Good morning, colleagues. I'm very pleased to be with you, and thank you very much for inviting me, and colleagues as well, because a couple of my colleagues are also in the room. I'm here to kickstart the day, but I'm also here to listen to you, because I think we're very keen to discuss, engage with all of you, and listen to the vision that you will present during the course of today. Let me start by giving a bit of the context of where we stand today. First, it is very clear that we must stay on course with regard to climate action. There is no alternative. And that was repeated a couple of weeks ago when the Commission adopted its communication on the 2040 targets. And there, the conclusion is clear. We need to stay on course, and we need to invest as much as possible and as fast as possible. And that leads to the Commission recommending this 90% reduction by 2040 as the most cost-effective way of reaching our climate neutrality objective by 2050. This is key for EU competitiveness because others are going very fast China, US, many others, we're not alone anymore in this challenging pathway. Also, in this communication, we made it very clear that one of the key conditions for reaching our long-term objective is to really realize and implement the 2030 targets and policies that we have adopted during the course of the last year. So this is a top priority, 2030 implementation. It is done through, of course, national actions. It's done through stakeholders' actions. But having decisions made on the ground by key operators is absolutely key to happen during this decade. So that's about the big picture and where we stand. So what does it mean for carbon removals? That's the topic of today. What is very clear also, and we made it also very clearly in the documents that we adopted recently, is that emission reduction is the top priority. This is what needs to happen. But at the same time, preserving carbon sink remain a priority, as well as developing carbon removal solutions. Because carbon removal solutions will have to play a key role to compensate residual emissions in the hard-to-abate sectors. When we look at the numbers, because our strategy is underpinned by very detailed modeling work, we see that by 2040, the level of emissions will be less than 850 million tons. And carbon removals, so land-based as well as industrial carbon removals, up to 400 million tons. So we're talking big numbers here. We're talking about a challenging move towards this higher level of removals. So what are we doing to address this challenge? And these are only first steps, and we know that more will need to be done, and also, as we will hear today, there will be future also policy developments in this field. So we have started by creating a framework for carbon removal certification, CRCF. Now, I guess this is common to many of you, but that's a very, very important first step, because without building trust, really understanding that we can have very robust carbon removals developed, we cannot go really much beyond that in terms of policy. So the carbon removal certification, which was approved by the co-legislator just a couple of weeks ago, now sets clearly the frame in terms of how to develop the methodologies for carbon farming, permanent storage, and storage in products. And that will bring transparency, environmental integrity, as well as creating a very standardized and solid methodologies for these different type of activities. And the aim is really to boost innovative carbon removal technologies, as well as sustainable carbon farming solutions in the respect of biodiversity and also fighting greenwashing. This is really the objective also, as I said, to increase the trust in carbon removals. That is going to be key to attract and mobilize private finance. So now we have the framework agreed by the co-legislator, but that's just the start. Because what needs to be done is to develop these methodologies for each of these activities. And this is why we have set up an expert group, and I'm sure some of you are part of this expert group, or will contribute, or will listen in, or will provide inputs to the work of this expert group, which is now created since a couple of months already. And the first meeting after the approval of the carbon removals will take place in April, and we will already start discussing on the basis of some reflection that we, together with our consultants, have been putting together. And the objective is first delegated act on these methodologies next year. So we are quite, I would say, we need to go quite fast with these methodologies. So that's the first thing that we have now engaged towards. And the second is, we all know that, okay, fine, we can capture the CO2, be from nature-based or from technological emissions, but we need to store the carbon. And that's one of the key gaps we see today in Europe, the lack of storage capacities for carbon. And this is why we have proposed, as part of the Net Zero Industry Act, these 50 million tons of injection capacity, putting an obligation for the first time on oil and gas operators to develop this injection capacity across Europe. And here, the legislation has been adopted, and we are moving forward with the implementation. Now, my last point is about the overall strategy. Because without a clear view on where is our vision, I think it's going to be hard to set the right coherent policy framework. And this is why, together with the 2040 communication, we adopted a sister communication, which is the Industrial Carbon Management Strategy. And that sets key milestones and policy initiatives to really set up this support for carbon removals without putting at risk, as I said, emission reduction or environmental integrity. We look in this strategy at 3 pathways: CCS, removals, and CCU, with as a horizontal issue the transport of CO2 across Europe, because we need to create really a single market for CO2. On the policy side, what are we going to do in the next couple of years? First, we will assess overall objectives for carbon removals in the context of the 2040 target and in the context of the upcoming reviews of the key legislation that will take place by 2026. So we will consider options and support mechanisms to allow the policy framework to recognize and valorize carbon removals. We will look if and how carbon removals can be accounted and covered by the EU ETS. And I know colleagues are here who are responsible for the carbon market, and I'm sure they can go more in detail about that. We will also look at how to boost research and innovation and the deployment, because that's absolutely key to lower costs and increase certainty around the impacts. And there, I would like just to say a few words about a very important instrument that we see to really scale up these technologies, which is the Innovation Fund. It's a fund which is created thanks to the EU ETS, because that's the auctioning of the allowances that allows the fund to exist. We have about 40 billion euros available for this decade. And today, we have about 6 billion euros, which is already committed for a very excellent project to decarbonize industry, but also support clean tech. And if we look at the portfolio of projects which are being supported, we see that about half of them concern CCUS. So we see a clear also understanding from the sector itself that this is a very important technology. So we are at a very exciting time for carbon removals. We will have to mobilize all efforts, and as I said, very keen to listen to you and have this debate with you today. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I will now ask my colleague Sylvain Delerce, who is our Associate Research Director, to talk to you a bit more about what we've been working on for not too far from, I think, 8 months now. It's been taking a lot of our energy and a lot of our optimism on board, and we hope we can communicate that with you.
Thank you. I don't know if this is working. Good morning to everyone. Thank you for joining us. So my name is Sylvain Delerce. As Clotilde said, I'm an Associate Research Director at Carbon Gap. It means a lot to me to be here today to discuss with you the project of having a proper and comprehensive CDR strategy for Europe. It was 2017 when I started to transition to carbon removals, resigned and reoriented my career. I was looking for more radical solutions to climate change, something that could allow us to dream of something better than just limiting a catastrophe. And I found this in carbon removal. My transition included a PhD in geochemistry. I'm not sure I recommend that to anyone, but it's been an incredible journey, to be honest, to witness the emergence of this new sector and of this new breed of climate solutions. Now, here we are, 2024, and CDR is a reality. CDR is in motion. We'll come back to that in the presentation. Whichever way you look at the climate crisis, CDR is needed to stabilize the climate. and it is already baked in a series of targets, either explicitly or implicitly. But the pace of CDR policy is becoming a bottleneck progressively, and that could threaten our capacity to stay on the safe side of climate change. So this pervasive climate policy gap, is what Carbon Gap proposes to tackle with a comprehensive CDR strategy in the EU. The EU must rise to the challenge, and now. We'll come back also to that in the presentation. We only have about 25 years to stabilize the climate system now, and the momentum that exists in CDR won't last under current conditions. So again, this is why we're calling today for a CDR strategy. We've worked on the design of such a strategy, and it's been, as Clotilde said, very much of a teamwork. So I'm honored to present this to you today with the slides. Before we start, we would like to engage with you a little bit with a quick question. So we will use a Slido. I'm sure you guys are familiar with this kind of tools. If we can put up the QR code, please, for the Slido. We'll ask you a very simple question and give you some minutes to share your views. So you can either use the QR code on the screen or go to slido.com and input the code that you see on the screen to access the question. All right. Can we put up the answers on the screen progressively? Right. So this is an open question. You should be able to share your thoughts using words that we should see coming up on the screen. Exactly. So what is missing for the current EU policy landscape to further develop and deploy carbon removal to the next level? Funding is apparently an important ingredient. Business case. I'd be curious to know if we're talking short-term, medium-term, or long-term, but I guess all of them. Targets, I can see climate justice safeguards. What else do we see? Strong guardrails, science and business case, clarity on use of certificates, separate targets. A lot of ingredients. There's a lot of work to be done. Okay. That's very interesting. So the prominent ones were definitely funding, business case, separate targets, and inclusion in the ETS. A long debate. Thank you very much for your answer. You can keep posting them, I get, and we can come back to that later. Let's go with the presentation now. So in the few slides that are coming, I will share with you the overview of this strategy we are publishing today. So we start with some basic things to remind everyone. I think everyone in this room is familiar with the definition of carbon dioxide removal, but it's always important to restate it and also to differentiate it from other methods like CCS and CCU. So the point on this slide, because you all know this, I guess, is really to remember us that the diversity of CDR methods that exist is an asset that we need to cultivate, because that's how we will be successful in scaling up. So I put on the screen the four main families of CDR. Biomass conversion, which is about stabilizing biomass or extracting its carbon to store it. Enhancing ecosystems and their natural ability to suck carbon out of the air and store it. Geochemical methods that are about essentially speeding up natural processes that occurs between the rocks, air, and water, and synthetic methods that involve industrial processes. Okay, I can switch. So yeah, diversity is what we need to keep in mind and we need to cultivate in the strategy. So what is at stake and why do we need CDR? Again, I guess most of you know that very well here, but we need it to counter the accumulation of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere and manage potentially the level of overshoot to avoid reaching tipping point. When we head towards net zero, we need carbon removal to enable net zero and be able to neutralize residual emissions. And then it's already stated in different official text and laws. There is a net negative phase after that that is very important, particularly for geographies like Europe. And the magnitude of the challenge is quite huge. According to IPCC and State of the CDR report, we might need between 5 and 10 gigatons CO2 removed every year by 2050, which means that there is an enormous scale-up challenge ahead of us. Okay, in the next two slides, I'd like to go into where is CDR now and why we could say that it is somehow at crossroads. In the last 3 to 4 years, significant progress has been made on CDR overall in the world, but also in the EU, and particularly on awareness, policy, and implementation. So CDR is now recognized as the third pillar of climate action. So that's reduce, adapt, and removed, and that's stated in many prominent publications and assemblies like G20, COP20, COP in general. So there is a strong consensus around this idea now. Because of that, some CDR policy has started to emerge in the EU and elsewhere. Alexandre mentioned very good examples in the EU of how CDR policy is emerging with CRCF, Green Claims, NZIA, and all these texts. And it's also amazing to see the number of companies has skyrocketed in these years. The volumes that are purchased and delivered have also grown significantly. So that means that the sector is in motion and that there is a strong momentum to keep growing it. Now, this is only the beginning of the story. Also, as Alexandre was saying right before, we have to scale this industry by a massive scale, and that comes with new challenges and also reveals new limitations of the current conditions. First, we can mention the ambiguity that remains around the ambition on CDR and where it is all going on the medium to long term, and that's potentially holding back investment, demand, and supply. The current policy framework remains fragmented in a way. We do have different bills touching on different aspects of CDR, but we miss that cohesive plan that we are discussing today, and that leaves in important gaps unaddressed right now. Also, for EU CDR entrepreneurs, it is still not straightforward and easy to find the support they need to scale up their projects and their technologies, and some methods are still under-researched. Finally, we can also mention that strong concerns remain regarding the governance of CDR, and that is a roadblock that all of us have identified for a long time, and we need to work on that to avoid potential limitation very soon. So for these reasons, we have the momentum, and we have a whole set of new challenges that we're facing for the scale-up of CDR. We need to act now, and the EU cannot afford to wait, particularly not to use the momentum that exists. So again, that's why today we are calling for a new EU CDR strategy, and that strategy has the following structure. There are what we call enabling conditions on which the EU has already made significant progress. The first is about setting targets and providing a direction of travel for the sector. So that's 2040 targets and the EU climate law, where we already have a fairly good idea of what the EU is aiming for. But it could be further developed, particularly in how we break things down and with separate targets and nested targets for different kinds of removals. Then about clarifying the rules of the game and build the trust within the sector. As it was mentioned, the CRCF is a huge step forward for the EU. It has solved several issues on the way, and I think the version that's been voted is really good. There are still, again, here some work to be done, particularly on the regulation of use cases, for example, to further develop these conditions. And then finally, on the physical infrastructure that is needed to transport and store this CO2. Again, here the EU has made a lot of progress with the ICMS, but these texts were not specifically tailored for CDR, so we consider that there's a need for a clear assessment if the needs of CDR will be met with the current version of this text, or if they need some amendments. If we are able to further develop these enabling conditions, the 4 pillars we introduced today, or we also call them proactive measures, are what we need to go further. So I will present them more into detail, but the first one is about boosting investment in research and innovation. The second one is about creating deployment incentives to accompany the scale-up of the CDR methods. Then the third one is about developing the long-term vision and logic for the CDR market. And the fourth one is about ensuring that this deployment is done in a just way. So we'll come back to this in more detail. Before we move on from this slide, what is important is this square. These pillars are designed to work together and won't be successful in isolation. So that's why we are calling for this cohesive strategy, because we can't keep addressing different aspects of the industry separately. Okay, so let's dive into the first pillar, which is about boosting research and innovation. First, I want to mention that this is both needed and strategic for the EU. First, the first goal is to reduce uncertainty. We have a huge diversity of existing CDR methods, but some of them still have to go through stage gate or to validate their performances on technical aspects or even societal performances. So to confirm this, we need to invest further in research and innovation to further test each of the concepts and make sure that they are scalable so that we don't rely or have oversight expectations on methods that might not be able to perform as much as we want them to. The second objective is to cultivate, we come back to this, the diversity of methods, broadening the range of viable CDR methods. This can be done by different approaches. The first one is to optimize existing CDR methods. Some of them exist, but their performances do not allow them to scale, so we need to work on their consumption of resources, energy, minerals, whatever. The second angle is to answer critical questions that are holding back some of the methods. I'm thinking open system, ocean alkalinity, and this kind of methods. Some answers are not here, and therefore the society will never provide a mandate to scale up. So we need to answer this question. Then we can also keep researching for new CDR approaches. I think all of you have followed that this is a vibrant ecosystem. New approaches are constantly being proposed, so there is probably room to find even more diversity of methods. Then the EU also needs to be in the competition and create EU champions. We all know that this market is poised to grow significantly. So we need to invest now to be in the game and to support all these entrepreneurs that exist in the EU to retain talent or even attract more and have the capacity to generate the removals we need or even export them. And finally, we need to gear up on CDR governance. We already mentioned that in the introduction. This is a new sector. This is a new breed of climate solutions. So we need also to ask ourselves what is the right governance and what is the governance that can create trust within the sector. So our recommendation, you will see them in the paper. They are more detailed than this, but they are mostly about making the funding more accessible, committing more funding, and making the funding more targeted as well, so that CDR can really rely on dedicated funding streams without having to compete with other clean techs, for example. I'll move on to the second pillar. So this one is about creating the deployment incentives that the sector needs to scale up. Here, the idea is really to accelerate this learning curve, particularly for these methods where we have now more to learn in the field than in the lab. So they need support to perform their exploratory scale-up in a way and test really in real conditions. It's been true in the past for other clean techs like wind and solar, for example, and the EU has been quite successful at supporting these sectors. So there is confidence that this can be repeated. One particularity of CDR is that it currently faces extra uncertainty, particularly on the long term, for this big market or big demand that we'll need that is not yet fully organized. So that's why deployment incentives are even more important. These deployment incentives share three main characteristics. They are predictable and sizable. They are long-lasting, and they are based on a high credibility of takers and resilient to political cycles. So that creates really the credibility for the investors to rely on them. They have, deployment incentives are potentially based mostly on public funding in the beginning, but very soon they will unleash private funding sources. As soon as a method is backed by the public funding, it's changed the game completely for investors. So that's also something we want to create with this. And that's also a good way for the EU to enshrine good practices on how you procure CDR, what kind of CDR you support, and for what uses. So I'll go very quickly on the recommendation. I will invite you to go to the paper to read them. But and there are many options for deployment incentives. We have landed on one approach, which is to create a pilot procurement program with a first phase based essentially on public funding, and a second one very soon after, where you could mix public and private funding to accelerate the deployment. The pillar 3 is about answering the question of the long-term logic for scaling CDR and buying huge amounts of CDR. So, yeah. Unlike solar or wind, the market for CDR needs to be created, a little bit like a waste management system or public services that needs a regulation to create a market. And so that's what we explore in Pillar 3, creating this long-term logic. The message here is that we are convinced, and that's reflected in the paper, that to achieve that, we need to stack different mechanisms. We can't rely on only one, say, ETS or any version of ETS integration, for example. So we've come up with a bunch of recommendations exploring how we could use different approaches and stack them so that at the end we have a high confidence that we are able to achieve the huge volumes because we are not betting on just one approach. So also, this long-term logic needs to readily consider going beyond compensation of residual emissions and also going beyond net zero. Because on the long term, these are the instruments that we will need to keep scaling up and up the demand and the market for CDR, even after net zero. And as we do that, of course, we potentially create a new market, compliance market, or burden for economic actors. So that we also need to design this while thinking of this, what we call the CDR diplomacy, and how we make sure we can articulate what is created in the EU versus the global market, a little bit like ETS and CBAM to protect the competitiveness of our economic actors. So essentially, there is a strong focus on land sync and how we can, again, stack different mechanisms to reach the desired targets. To explore how we can embed CDR in existing EU legislations. We propose to change the focus from only integration into ETS1 and to consider alternatives such as a removal trading scheme, and to implement potentially CDR targets into an effort sharing regulation. Final pillar, pillar 4, which is about ensuring that the deployment of CDR is made right and in a just manner. First, because it is an existing commitment of the EU. The EU has already committed to a just and inclusive green transition, so CDR should be no exception to that. But also because there is a need to build this trust among all stakeholders. So, and in them, of course, there is the general public, but also for investors, buyers, and all the different stakeholders, we need to create the commitment that the market we are creating will last and won't crash on similar issues as we have witnessed in the past. So that's very important. In the strategy, we've tried also to make recommendation that allows us to use the climate justice principles, which are described in the presentation, in the paper, and to turn them into real measures, with actionable measures, so that they don't remain just concepts that we want to respect, but there is actually a way to enforce them. And another strong idea here is to create the conditions to decentralize the initiative on CDR. A little bit like, so we call it the Carbon Removal Communities Initiatives. That's largely inspired on the similar concept on renewables, and we think that's quite powerful to provide the tools so that communities can learn, understand CDR, and then take the initiative. Okay, I'm almost done. On this visual, the idea is to illustrate how we see these different pillars work with each other in time. And what is important here is to see that they are stacking each other, they overlap in time, they are phased, and they are complementary. So again, insisting on the fact that they don't work in isolation, but they work together because they have cross dependencies and they deliver outcomes that one need. And so yeah, they depend on each other essentially. All right, so some key takeaways. While preparing this strategy, we have realized that the EU is completely equipped to scale CDR. That the EU has experience in developing clean tech, so there is confidence that the EU can do that again. But it's more than time to go to the next level and build on the progress made on these enabling conditions and go to the next level implementing the 4 pillars. So these are the new measures that are required, and in the paper you will find 18 of them gathered in these 4 pillars. Okay, I finished my presentation with this citation from Leonard Bernstein. To achieve great things, we need 2 things, a plan and not quite enough time. I think we all agree here that the second condition is met, so now we need the plan. Thank you very much.